Why has this chair by the window remained untouched for over 40 years? This isn't just a story about a chair, it's about a promise, a memory, a quiet kind of hope that refuses to fade. Told across generations, this story became one of the most talked about symbols of healing and belonging in small-town America. But who was the chair really waiting for? And why did it break the hearts of those who walked away and of those who stayed? Set in the quiet town of Willow Creek, this true-to-life tale begins with a silent seat and ends with something unforgettable. It's a story that sparked a wave of reflection across thousands of young Americans. Some even said it changed the way they saw home, grief, and return. In the heart of Napa Valley, nestled between rolling vineyards and golden hills that shimmer under the California sun, there was a small town named Willow Creek. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the seasons painted the landscape with gentle strokes of color, and where stories lingered like the soft mist that settled each morning. At the center of this town stood a quaint coffee shop called Window Seat, a humble sanctuary that had been part of the community for over 4 decades. The shop was a modest building, its weathered wooden exterior softened by climbing ivy, and pots of lavender that spilled fragrant purple blooms onto the sidewalk. Inside, the air was thick with the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans, mingling with the delicate notes of vanilla and cinnamon. A record player sat quietly in the corner, filling the room with the soothing strains of jazz that seemed to cradle the patrons in a timeless embrace. The owner of the cafe was Margaret Ellis, a woman in her early 70s with silver hair, neatly pinned back, and eyes that carried the warmth of 1,000 sunsets. Margaret had lived in Willow Creek her entire life, watching the town change slowly while remaining a steady presence behind the counter. She greeted every customer with a gentle smile and a kind word, making the cafe feel less like a business and more like an extension of home. But there was one thing in Window Seat that set it apart, something that had puzzled and intrigued visitors for years. A single wooden chair positioned right by the large front window, bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light. Unlike every other seat in the cafe, this one was always left empty. No matter how crowded the shop became, Margaret never allowed anyone to sit there. The chair was simple, with a worn cushion and delicate carvings along its backrest. It faced out onto the quiet street where the world drifted by in slow, lazy moments. To most, it looked like just an ordinary chair, but for the regulars in Willow Creek, it was much more. It was the empty chair, a silent sentinel that held an unspoken story, a place reserved for someone unseen. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves tumbled like golden coins along the sidewalk, a newcomer stepped into the cafe. Lucas, a young writer seeking refuge from the bustle of San Francisco, had come to Willow Creek in search of inspiration. He pushed open the glass door, the bell tinkling softly above his head, and was immediately enveloped by the cozy warmth inside. Lucas took a seat near the counter, ordering a black coffee, his eyes wandering around the room as he absorbed the quiet charm. His gaze fell on the empty chair by the window, and curiosity pulled at him. He asked Margaret, who was carefully wiping down the tables, about the chair. Margaret paused for a moment, her eyes distant yet tender. "That chair has been here longer than I have," she said softly. "It's been waiting for someone for over 40 years now." Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Waiting? For who?" Margaret offered a small, knowing smile, but said nothing more, moving on to tend to another customer. Lucas sat back, the question lingering in his mind like a half-remembered dream. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas found himself returning to the cafe every morning. He'd write in his notebook, stealing glances at the chair by the window. He noticed how the townspeople treated the chair with quiet reverence. Never once did he see anyone even brush against it, let alone sit in it. One afternoon, a group of elderly men gathered near the window, reminiscing about times long past. Their voices softened when the empty chair came up in conversation. "That chair," one of them said, his voice thick with nostalgia, "was saved for Eleanor, Margaret's late husband. He was a good man, full of life, but he passed too soon." Margaret had never spoken openly about Eleanor, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears whenever the name was mentioned. The chair, it seemed, was a monument, not just to loss, but to waiting, to hope, and to love that refused to fade. Lucas listened quietly, his heart aching with the depth of feeling surrounding that empty seat. It wasn't just a chair, it was a symbol of something much larger. A place where memories sat alongside the present, where grief and comfort intertwined. The cafe continued to bustle with life. Farmers stopped out after early morning work, couples held hands over steaming mugs, and children pressed their noses against the glass to watch the world outside. Yet the chair remained untouched, a sacred space amid the daily rhythms. One rainy evening, as the soft patter of droplets played a gentle tune against the window panes, Lucas noticed Margaret sitting alone near the counter, gazing toward the empty chair. He approached her quietly. "May I ask again about the chair?" he said softly. Margaret nodded, inviting him to sit beside her. "It's for those who are lost," she said, her voice bent. On a chilly November afternoon, the gentle fog rolled over Willow Creek like a soft blanket, muting the colors of the town and casting a quiet stillness over the streets. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and fallen leaves, and a thin drizzle began to fall, adding a rhythmic tapping to the rooftops and sidewalks. In the midst of this calm, a small figure hurried down Main Street, her footsteps quick but careful as she clutched a worn book tightly to her chest. June was barely 10 years old, with tangled chestnut hair that clung damply to her pale face, and eyes that seemed too old for someone so young. Eyes that carried the weight of unspoken stories. Her clothes were threadbare and soaked from the rain, but still she pressed forward, as if drawn by an unseen force. The warmth of the window seat cafe beckoned to her like a lighthouse in the mist. Pushing open the door, she was greeted by the comforting embrace of warmth and the familiar scent of coffee and lavender. The bell chimed softly overhead as she stepped inside, her shoes leaving tiny puddles on the wooden floor. The cafe was alive with the quiet murmur of patrons and the soft jazz melody playing in the background. Margaret Ellis looked up from behind the counter, her eyes immediately taking in the small, soaked child standing there. Without a word, Margaret reached for a thick woolen blanket from beneath the counter and draped it gently over June's shoulders. She motioned towards a corner near the back where a small table sat secluded, its chair pulled out and waiting. June nodded shyly, clutching her book a little tighter, and slipped into the seat. Margaret busied herself with preparing a warm drink, a rich, creamy hot chocolate topped with a swirl of whipping cream. She placed it carefully on the table in front of June, who looked up in surprise and gratitude. The warmth seeped into her fingers as she cupped the mug, the chocolatey aroma filling her senses. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small, hesitant smile. The other customers in the cafe barely noticed the new arrival. Some glanced with quiet curiosity, but mostly the atmosphere remained unruffled, a sanctuary where the worries of the outside world seemed to pause. June settled into the chair, opening her battered book, Anne of Green Gables, its pages worn and dog-eared from many readings. Her eyes scanned the words, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in memories and questions she dared not voice. Margaret watched from a distance, sensing the depth of the child's loneliness. She knew that June was no ordinary visitor. There was a fragility about her, a silent plea that words could not capture. Though Margaret rarely pried, she decided to offer what she could, quiet company and a refuge from the storm. The days that followed saw June return again and again, often after school, sometimes on weekends. She would slip inside the cafe, shake off her wet coat, and find her way to the same corner seat. Margaret made it a habit to have a warm drink ready for her, sometimes hot chocolate, sometimes spiced tea, always accompanied by a soft smile and a kind word. Slowly, the townspeople began to notice the little girl who came to sit near the window, her gaze often drifting toward the empty chair that Margaret kept sacred. June never spoke about her family, and no one pressed her. It was clear she was carrying invisible burdens. Rumors gently circulated around the town. Some said June's parents had left, others whispered of illness in her household. But Margaret knew the truth in a way only a guardian of quiet places could. June was a child adrift, holding on to fragments of hope in a world that had seemed to close in on her too soon. One rainy afternoon, as a storm raged outside, June finally broke her silence. "Why does that chair never get used?" she asked Margaret softly, nodding toward the empty seat by the window. Margaret's eyes widened, and she motioned for June to come closer. "That chair," she began gently, is for those who are lost, for anyone who feels like they don't belong or have nowhere to go. It's a place to rest, to breathe, and to remember that there's always hope. June looked down at her hands folded in her lap, the words settling into a quiet place inside her. Do you think someone will come to sit there someday? Margaret smiled. I believe they will. Sometimes we just have to wait for the right time, for the right person. June nodded, her eyes bright with a mixture of sadness and something like determination. From that day on, she seemed to draw strength from the presence of the chair, even though she never dared to sit in it. As the weeks passed, a delicate rhythm formed between June and the cafe. She became a familiar figure, one who brought a subtle lightness to the small community. Margaret often found herself watching the child, marveling at how a little presence could ripple outward, touching hearts quietly but deeply. One afternoon as gone, the window seat cafe had long been a place where the quiet moments of life gathered like soft shadows in the corners of a warm room. The small wooden chair by the large window, perpetually empty, held a special place in the heart of the town, a symbol not of absence, but of hope. It was known, quietly and without fuss, as the chair for those who had lost their way. Margaret Ellis, the cafe's gentle caretaker, had always understood this truth. She often reflected on the people who passed through her doors, their smiles, their sorrows, their silent struggles. The chair was meant for them, a sanctuary, a space of quiet refuge where words were not necessary. Sometimes she thought, what a lost soul needs most is not advice or consolation, but simply a place to rest and breathe, a place to gather strength before moving forward. One rainy afternoon, the cafe was nearly empty, save for a few regular patrons seeking shelter from the cold. Margaret was wiping down tables when a man pushed open the door. His appearance was unremarkable at first glance, a middle-aged man wearing a weathered coat and a cap pulled low against the rain. But there was something about his eyes, sharp and searching, that seemed to carry a heaviness. He hesitated as he stepped inside, his gaze flickering around the room until it settled on the empty chair by the window. Without a word, he moved toward it and sat down heavily. Margaret approached him quietly, setting a steaming cup of coffee before him. He looked up, startled by her kindness, but offered only a nod of thanks. The man's name was David. He was a stranger to Willow Creek, a traveler with no fixed address or destination. His life had recently unraveled, a painful divorce, the loss of his room, and a fractured relationship with his teenage son. Each failure had chipped away at his confidence until he found himself drifting, unsure of where to turn or what to hold on to. As David sat by the window, rain tracing rivulets down the glass, he felt the weight of his troubles settle more heavily. But within the quiet walls of the cafe, with the soft jazz music weaving through the air, he began to experience something rare. Pete Armstrong's. Margaret watched him from behind the counter, recognizing in David the familiar pattern of a man searching for something beyond the storm. Without pressing him, she knew the chair offered more than just a place to sit. It was an invitation to pause and breathe, to let go of the relentless pace of a world that demanded answers before questions could be asked. Over the next several days, David returned. Each time he took the same seat, sipped his coffee, and let the rhythms of the cafe soothe his troubled mind. He didn't speak much, but he listened to the soft murmur of conversations, to the gentle clinking of cups, to the whispered reassurance of the rain outside. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds and painted the town in warm light, David found himself opening up to Margaret in a quiet voice. He spoke of his regrets, of the mistakes that haunted him, and the loneliness that had crept in after losing his family. Margaret listened patiently, her eyes kind and steady. "It's not about where you've been or what you've lost," she said softly. "It's about finding your way forward. The chair is here for those moments when the path seems dark and uncertain." David nodded, feeling a flicker of hope stir inside him. The chair was more than a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of compassion, a reminder that even when life felt fractured, there was a place that welcomed brokenness without judgment. As weeks passed, David's visits to the cafe became a ritual, a lifeline amid the chaos. He began to write again, pouring his thoughts onto paper, slowly rebuilding the bridge to the son he feared he had lost. The chair by the window witnessed this transformation, silent but steadfast. One evening as twilight settled over Willow Creek, David sat in the chair, staring out at the horizon where the sky melted into soft hues of purple and gold. He realized that though he had been lost, he was not alone. The chair had held him when he had no strength, and now it was time to rise. Before leaving, David placed a small folded note on the table beside the chair, a simple message of gratitude and hope for whoever might sit there next. He stepped out into the night with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face the world again. The Window Seat Cafe remained a beacon for those who wandered through life's uncertainties. The empty chair continued to hold its silent promise, a refuge for the lost, a symbol of patience, and an invitation to find one's way home. The days grew shorter, and the crisp air of early autumn settled over Willow Creek, wrapping the town in a quiet melancholy that seemed to seep into every corner. At the Window Seat Cafe, the gentle hum of conversation was tinged with a softer, more reflective tone as Margaret went about her routine with a growing heaviness in her heart. The seasons were changing, but so too were the lives of those who found refuge within her small cafe. June, the quiet girl with the worn book always in her arms, had been coming faithfully every day for months. Her presence had become a gentle rhythm in Margaret's life, an unspoken bond between two souls who carried their own burdens in silence. But lately, June's visits had grown less frequent, and when she did come, there was a weariness in her eyes deeper than before. Margaret sensed something was wrong. The lively spark that had once flickered behind June's gaze was dimming, and the quiet strength that had held her up seemed to be fading. One afternoon, after handing June a warm cup of cocoa and a soft blanket, Margaret finally gathered the courage to ask gently, "Is everything all right, dear?" June looked down, her fingers nervously tracing the edges of her book's pages. After a long pause, she whispered, "Grandma's very sick. They say she doesn't have much time left." The weight of those words hung in the air between them. Margaret's heart ached for the little girl who had so much pain in her young life. She reached out, placing a comforting hand over June's. "You're not alone, June. We're all here for you." The days that followed were marked by a delicate tension. June's growing absence was felt like a hollow space in the cafe. Margaret found herself watching the empty chair by the window, wondering if it was waiting for June to return or if it was mourning the silence she left behind. Word spread quietly through the town that June's grandmother had passed away. It was a sorrow shared by many who had come to care for the girl in the cafe. June had been taken away to a children's home in a city far from Willow Creek, a place Margaret had never visited but often thought about in the stillness of the night. Margaret packed away the familiar cup that June had always chosen, a simple mug with a tiny chip on the rim, and placed it carefully on a shelf. Beside it, she set the worn copy of Anne of Green Gables, the book June had clung to so tightly. It was a silent tribute, a piece of June's spirit left behind in the cafe's warm embrace. Weeks turned into months. The cafe continued to be a sanctuary for the lost and the lonely, but something was missing. The chair by the window sat empty, a quiet testament to absence and longing. Margaret, now feeling the years settle heavily on her shoulders, often found herself sitting by that very chair in the evenings. She would gaze out at the fading light and remember the faces that had come and gone, the stories whispered across the steam of coffee cups, the moments of connection shared in silence. One chilly afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the window, Margaret felt a sudden weariness unlike any before. The years of tending the cafe, the weight of loss and hope mingled together, pressed down upon her. She rested her hand on the chair's smooth wooden arm and closed her eyes, feeling the gentle pulse of memories, a lifetime woven into that small space. Margaret passed away quietly in the cafe she had nurtured for decades. The news spread softly through Willow Creek, a ripple of sorrow touching the hearts of those who had found comfort within the cafe's walls. The town came together, determined to keep the spirit of Window Seat alive, honoring the woman who had created a refuge for so many. In the days after Margaret's passing, the community gathered to remember her. Each year, on the anniversary of her death, a simple ritual was born, placing a warm cup of coffee and a sprig of lavender on the empty chair by the window. Lavender, Margaret's favorite flower, symbolized calm and healing, a reminder that even in grief, there was peace. The chair remained untouched, revered as a symbol of patience and enduring love. It held the promise that those who were lost, like June and David before her, could find their way back, not through force or expectation, but through quiet acceptance. Though Margaret was gone, the cafe lived on as a beacon in the small town. Its walls held the echoes of stories shared and hearts mended. The chair by the window, once a silent witness to loss and healing, waited patiently, an eternal invitation to rest, to breathe, and to begin again. Time slipped by like a gentle current flowing through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, carrying with it the memories and stories that had woven themselves into the fabric of the little town's soul. The Window Seat Cafe stood steadfast as ever, a beacon of warmth and refuge amid the shifting seasons and changing lives. Even without Margaret's steady presence, her spirit lingered in the soft glow of the lamps, the worn wooden tables, and most poignantly, the empty chair by the window. The townsfolk had taken it upon themselves to preserve the cafe, a living monument to the kindness and patience that Margaret had embodied. Though the woman who had brewed countless cups of coffee and offered quiet comfort was no longer there, her legacy endured in every corner of the place. The chair by the window remained untouched, a sacred space holding the stories of those who had come seeking solace. Life in Willow Creek moved forward slowly, measured by the turning of the seasons and the gentle rhythms of the town's daily life. New faces appeared among the familiar ones, and the cafe welcomed them all with the same quiet acceptance. It was a place where time seemed to pause, allowing visitors to breathe and reflect, to find a moment of peace in a world that often demanded haste. Among the many who frequented the cafe, the empty chair took on a deeper significance. It became more than just a symbol. It was a reminder that loss and longing were shared human experiences, that grief was a journey one did not have to face alone. The chair was a quiet invitation to sit, to pause, and to heal in one's own time. There was a certain magic in the way the cafe held space for the invisible struggles that everyone carried. For some, it was a sanctuary after a long day's work, a place to watch the sun set beyond the valley and let the burdens of the world fall away. For others, it was a refuge from loneliness, a quiet corner where a single cup of coffee could become a balm for the heart. June's absence was a tender thread woven into the fabric of the cafe's story. Though she had been taken far away, her memory lingered like a soft whisper. The worn copy of Anne of Green Gables still rested on the windowsill, its pages yellowed with age but treasured nonetheless. Locals often spoke of the girl who had once sat there, her quiet presence a testament to resilience and hope. One rainy afternoon, a young woman stepped into the cafe. She carried an air of familiarity that stirred something deep within the hearts of those who remembered. Her hair fell in soft waves, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion that seemed to hold a lifetime. In her hands, she clutched the same worn book that had belonged to June. Without hesitation, she moved toward the chair by the window, the chair that had waited so patiently through the years. Her hands trembled slightly as she settled into the seat, the weight of the past and present settling over her like a gentle embrace. Tears welled in her eyes, but there was also a quiet peace in her expression, a sense of coming home after a long journey. She was June, grown now, returned to the place where her story had begun. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but steady. "I was lost for so long," she whispered. "But this chair, it never left me. It held a promise that I could come back, that I could heal." The cafe seemed to breathe with her words, the lights shifting as if to welcome her home. Other patrons watched in respectful silence, understanding the profound weight of her return. The chair had been waiting, as it always did, offering a space where broken hearts could mend. June's story became a new chapter in the life of the Window Seat Cafe. She began to visit more frequently, sharing small smiles with the regulars, her presence a reminder that healing was possible. She spoke softly of the struggles she had faced, the loneliness she had endured, and the strength she had found in returning to the place that had never forgotten her. The town embraced her story, weaving it into their own tapestry of hope and resilience. The cafe's empty chair remained a powerful symbol, a testament to the enduring human spirit, the kindness of strangers, and the quiet courage it takes to face the widows of the past. As time flowed on, The cafe continued to be a sanctuary for those seeking a moment of stillness in a chaotic world. The chair by the window stood as a silent witness to countless stories of loss and recovery, of despair and hope. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from words or actions, but from the simple act of being present, of sitting quietly and allowing life to unfold in its own time. In the heart of Willow Creek, the Window Seat Cafe remained a place where time moved gently, where the past and present met in a space filled with love, patience, and the unspoken promise that no one would ever have to face their darkness alone. The Window Seat Cafe held a silence that was almost sacred, a quiet stillness that seemed to stretch beyond the walls of the little building nestled in the heart of Willow Creek. For years, the empty chair by the window had become more than a piece of furniture. It was a silent guardian of promises made and kept. Now, with June's return, the cafe's atmosphere shimmered with a new sense of hope and renewal. Yet it also carried the weight of unspoken vows, a promise etched deeply into the wood grain of that reserved seat. June's presence breathed life back into the cafe, her visits becoming a ritual of quiet reflection and subtle healing. Each time she sat in the chair, the soft light filtering through the window seemed to wrap around her like a gentle embrace, a reminder of the promise that had been kept for her. She no longer felt lost. The chair had become a symbol of belonging, a testament to the power of patience and faith. The townspeople watched her with quiet reverence, sensing that this chair held a magic far beyond the ordinary. It was more than a place to sit. It was a sanctuary where wounds could slowly mend, where the heart could find room to breathe. Many who had once brushed past the story of the chair now sought it out, drawn by the hope it whispered to those who were willing to listen. As June settled deeper into her new life, she began to understand the true meaning behind the chair's silence. It was not just about waiting for someone to come home. It was about the promise of acceptance without conditions, of love without judgment. It was a vow that no matter how far one might wander, how lost or broken they might feel, there would always be a place to return to, a place where they could simply be. One evening, as autumn painted the valley in hues of amber and gold, June stayed late at the cafe. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant fires. She sat by the window, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings on the chair's worn armrest. Her thoughts drifted to the years she had spent away, the loneliness, the fear, the search for something she couldn't quite name. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. Eleanor's granddaughter, Clara, who had recently moved back to Willow Creek to help care for the cafe, stepped inside. Clara carried with her a quiet strength and a warmth that reminded June of Eleanor herself. She approached the chair with a gentle smile. "This chair holds more than just memories," Clara said softly, taking the seat opposite June. "It holds a promise that no one here is ever truly alone." June nodded, her eyes glistening. "It saved me," she whispered. "When I was lost, that chair was the one thing that never gave up on me." Clara reached out, placing a comforting hand over June's. "And that's why we keep it empty, not as a symbol of absence, but as a beacon of hope." Together, they spoke of the years when the cafe had been filled with quiet longing, when the chair had waited patiently for someone who needed it most. They talked about the invisible threads that connected the people of Willow Creek, how stories of pain and healing intertwined to create a community bound by empathy and understanding. The promise of the chair extended beyond the cafe walls. It was a quiet pact among the townsfolk to care for one another, to offer grace to those who struggled in silence. It was a reminder that healing was not a solitary journey, but one shared through kindness and presence. As winter approached, the cafe prepared for the annual remembrance ceremony. On the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, the townspeople gathered to honor her legacy. They placed lavender sprigs and steaming cups of coffee on the window seat, paying homage to the woman who had held space for so many. June stood among them, feeling the warmth of the crowd and the weight of the promise she now carried. She knew that the chair was no longer just Eleanor's. It belongs to all who had felt lost and found their way back. It was a symbol of resilience, a silent vow that no matter how dark the path, there was always a light waiting at the end. The ceremony ended with a soft murmur of voices in the fading glow of candlelight. As the crowd dispersed into the cold night, June lingered by the window, her heart full. The chair sat empty beside her, but it was far from lonely. It was a promise kept, a pledge of hope, healing, and the unbreakable bond between those who seek comfort in the quiet places. In the days that followed, June began to share her story with those who came to the cafe, offering gentle words of encouragement to the weary souls who found their way through the door. She spoke not of pain, but of the power of presence and the healing that comes from simply being seen. The Window Seat Cafe thrived as a sanctuary, its walls echoing with laughter and quiet conversations. With tears shed and smiles shared, the empty chair remained at the heart of it all, a steadfast promise that no matter. The crisp morning air settled over Willow Creek with a quiet stillness that seemed to hold its breath, as if the town itself awaited something long overdue. The little cafe by the window, with its weathered sign and familiar warmth, stood as a beacon of gentle constancy in a world that was always changing. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint aroma of lavender, the signature tribute that had become a ritual in memory of Eleanor and the promise she left behind. And on that morning, the window seat, the chair that had been empty for so long, held a presence that was unmistakably alive. June had returned. Her footsteps, hesitant yet steady, echoed softly against the wooden floor as she pushed open the cafe's door. The bell above tinkled, a small but clear note that announced her arrival. She carried with her the years she had lived away, the hopes and fears, the losses and growth, all etched in the lines of her face and the depths of her eyes. Yet there was something unmistakably familiar in the way she moved toward the chair, a magnetic pull that had drawn her back through time and distance. As she approached, the chair seemed to welcome her, its worn wood smooth beneath her fingertips. Sitting down, June felt a wave of emotions, relief, sorrow, gratitude, all mingling in the quiet space between breaths. The cafe was hushed, save for the soft murmur of early patrons who, sensing the significance of the moment, gave her space and respect. No one spoke aloud. Words were unnecessary. This was a homecoming beyond words, a reunion of spirit and memory. The years away had been marked by struggle and searching. After losing her grandmother, June had been sent to a distant foster home, a place filled with strangers and cold walls. She carried with her a lingering emptiness, a feeling of being adrift in a world that had no clear place for her. Yet somewhere deep inside, the memory of the cafe, and especially that empty chair, remained a flicker of hope, a silent promise that she was not alone. Over time, she moved through different cities, schools, and homes, always holding on to the worn copy of Anne of Green Gables that Eleanor had once placed on the chair for her. It was a tangible link to the past, a reminder of the gentle kindness she had once known. Yet the weight of loss and separation was heavy, and for many years, June's heart was a quiet storm of yearning and uncertainty. Now, as she sat in the window seat once more, those years seemed to fold in on themselves. The pain and the hope, the distance and the closeness, they all converged in this moment of return. The chair held her steady, offering a space where she could simply be, without explanation or expectation. The cafe's door opened again, and Clara stepped inside, her eyes lighting up when she saw June. Without a word, she crossed the room and sat beside her, offering a steady presence that spoke of welcome and understanding. Their hands met briefly, a silent connection that bridged past and present, pain and healing. June found herself sharing stories she had long kept inside, tales of the foster homes that never felt like home, of nights spent wondering if she would ever find a place where she belonged, of the small victories and quiet defeats that marked her journey. Clara listened without judgment, her presence a balm to wounds that had never fully healed. As days turned to weeks, June became a part of the cafe's rhythm once again. She helped behind the counter, greeted customers with a shy smile, and most importantly, she allowed herself to be part of a community that valued her simply for who she was. The window seat no longer felt like a lonely symbol, but a shared space of healing and hope. One afternoon, as the sun cast long golden rays through the cafe's windows, June pulled out her well-worn copy of Anne of Green Gables and began to read aloud to a small group of children gathered around her. Her voice, steady and warm, brought the stories to life, weaving a tapestry of imagination and comfort. The cafe filled with laughter and wide-eyed wonder, a testament to the healing power of stories shared and connections made. Outside, the town of Willow Creek seemed to breathe a little easier, its heart beating in time with the quiet miracles unfolding within the cafe's walls. The promise of the window seat, the promise Eleanor had made so many years ago, was alive and well. It was a promise that no matter how lost one might feel, there was always a place to return to, a place where one would be met with patience, love, and acceptance. June's return was not the end of the story, but a new beginning, a chapter filled with hope, resilience, and the gentle power of belonging. She had come home, not just to a chair by a window, but to a community that had waited for her, a legacy of kindness that would carry forward through generations. And in that quiet cafe, bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light, the window seat held its promise once more. The cafe hummed softly with the familiar sounds of clinking cups, whispered conversations, and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted warm hues across the streets of Willow Creek, casting long shadows that stretched toward the horizon. Inside, the window seat remained exactly where it always had been, steady, patient, and waiting. But now, it was no longer an empty symbol of longing. It was a living testament to stories told, lives touched, and journeys begun. June sat quietly in the chair, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the book resting on her lap. The cafe around her had changed in subtle ways over the years. New faces had come and gone, but the spirit of the place, rooted in kindness, understanding, and quiet refuge, had remained steadfast. She had grown alongside this community, finding strength in the connections forged within these walls. And still the chair held a special place in her heart, a reminder of the paths that led her here. People came and went, each carrying their own burdens and secrets, each seeking something they could not always name. The window seat became a sanctuary not just for June, but for many, a place to pause, to breathe, to be heard without words. It was a silent witness to laughter and tears, to new beginnings and farewells. The chair embraced all who needed it, offering a quiet kind of solace that transcended language or explanation. One chilly autumn evening, as a light rain tapped softly against the cafe's windows, a man stepped inside. His coat was worn, and his eyes held the tired look of someone who had wandered far. He paused by the entrance, taking in the warm glow and the comforting hum of life within. Without hesitation, he made his way to the window seat, where June sat reading aloud to a small group of children gathered on the floor. She noticed him immediately, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and empathy. The man settled into the chair, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Around him, the murmur of voices softened, as if the room itself acknowledged the weight he carried. He said nothing, but in that quiet moment, the chair spoke for him. It whispered of hope, of second chances, of the simple but profound power of being seen and accepted. June closed her book gently and approached him, offering a warm smile. They exchanged no immediate words, but the connection between them was palpable. A shared understanding of what it meant to be lost and found, to carry wounds unseen yet deeply felt. Over the following days, the man became a part of the cafe's tapestry, slowly opening up as the safe space around him worked its quiet magic. Stories began to flow, intertwining with the many others held within the cafe's walls. Each visitor, each stranger, brought with them a new thread, threads of pain, resilience, joy, and healing, that wove together into a vibrant tapestry of humanity. The window seat was no longer just a chair, it was a beacon, a gathering place for souls seeking refuge and connection. June found purpose in this unfolding story, becoming not just a guest in the cafe, but a keeper of its legacy. She helped create a place where stories could be shared without fear, where silence was as valuable as conversation, and where healing was nurtured by the simple act of being present. The chair remained at the center of it all, a steadfast reminder that sometimes all we need is a place to rest, physically, emotionally, spiritually. As seasons passed, the cafe hosted book readings, quiet music nights, and gatherings where people from all walks of life found common ground. The window seat became a symbol recognized beyond Willow Creek, inspiring others to create spaces of kindness and understanding in their own communities. One afternoon, June stood by the window, watching the golden leaves drift lazily to the ground. She thought about Eleanor, about June the child who had once sought shelter here, and about all the lives touched by that simple chair. The story was far from over. It was a living, breathing narrative that continued to evolve with each person who crossed the threshold, each heart that dared to hope again. The window seat held its promise, not as an ending, but as an invitation. An invitation to come as you are, to find rest in a world that often rushes past, to be met with patience, love, and acceptance. It was a story that belonged to everyone and no one at once. A quiet reminder that sometimes the most profound healing begins with simply having a place to sit. And so in the heart of a small town nestled between hills and memories, the cafe in its window seat stood ready, waiting for the next story to unfold, the next soul to find their way home. The chair remained empty only until someone in need arrived, a silent sentinel holding space for the lost, the weary, and the hopeful. Because in the end, the story was never truly about a chair. It was about the love that fills the mom. If this story touched a quiet place in your heart, if it reminded you that sometimes all we need is a seat by the window and someone who believes we'll find our way back, then don't let the story end here. At Light and Lessons, we share more than just stories. We share the kind of truths that heal, inspire, and help you grow through even the hardest seasons of life. So if you believe in the quiet power of hope, in second chances, in the beauty of being remembered, give this video a like and subscribe to follow our journey of light, love, and life-changing lessons. Because here, every story is a reminder. You matter, you are not forgotten, and your seat is still waiting.